Hello, good evening, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against all of the manipulations, attacks, and attempts at behavior and thought control that we come under here in the 21st century. Tonight, I want to begin a discussion on a topic that, while not exactly new to the material that we have discussed on this channel before, has not yet been broken down here in a systematic way so that we can have a foundational understanding from which we can build a broader framework through which we can think about the world around us. I'm speaking about the concept of psychological operations, or PSYOPs for short. Now, in some way, all of the topics that we have discussed so far on this channel have a direct connection to the concept of psyops. One of the goals of this channel is that we all grow in our perceptive capacity so that we're able to recognize when we're being targeted by these elusive psychological manipulations. The only way to keep our minds on guard is to be prepared to deal with the attacks that may come our way. Really, every topic that we've covered is in some form or fashion used by controlling forces, controlling entities, to prey on our psychological state and direct us toward outcomes that those entities would desire for us. But simply being aware of psyops is not enough to have a strong defense against the tactics that are used to control the ways that people think and behave. If it were that easy, we would have no need to care about such things, and life would be much simpler and peaceful. Or would it? Could that narrative actually be part of the thing that we need to be guarding our minds against? How could we know? What are the signs of a psyop, and what sorts of ways are they used to achieve the goals of the people that are running them? These questions and more have many answers, and no single psyop is the same as another, and many times they're layered and nested within each other. That is part of what makes them so powerful. Every detail inside the operation is able to be tailor-made to direct people toward a specific desired outcome. We learned a little bit about this when we discussed the early advent of propaganda in the 20th century. Men like Edward Bernays and Walter Lippmann laid the groundwork for the widespread and global psychological operations that we experience today. They, of course, were not the first people to use psychology to control people's opinions. However, it was in the 21st century where we saw the greatest advancements in psychological warfare. What was initially developed as a means to boost product sales and materialistic consumerism was quickly co-opted by the military-industrial complex and pumped so full of money and research that today we are hard-pressed to distinguish between genuine reality and a multitude of simulated, fabricated stories aimed at subverting what was once understood to be true, until all that we're left with is choosing what appears to be the least evil and corrupted version of reality, which will allow us to simply make it through the day with some sense of our sanity intact. At least that's what we are led to believe. As with any study, we first need to lay some groundwork and come to an understanding about a few terms. For starters, we need to establish that a psyop is far more than simple manipulation of a person's psychology. That may seem obvious to some that are watching, but what I often see, particularly in my own thinking, is that people tend to assume that they understand something to a high degree only to wind up being utterly ignorant of the depth and the layers that are present within any concept or topic. Such is the case with the concept of psyops. Even more important is that psyops actually become extremely effective when people are assuming that they understand the things that they see and hear. It's through that inflated self-image that the manipulation is able to be achieved to its greatest degree. Remember in our discussion on narcissism and narcissistic supply that controlling entities prey on people who fall into those kinds of thinking patterns. So we must make certain that we are checking for where we may be overlooking what appears to be simple. It's very likely not the case. A mentor of mine often reminds me that nothing is too simple to be overlooked, and it's often in the more simple areas of life that highly complex things are hiding just below the surface. With that established, we can move on to our first term in understanding psyops, and that is narrative. There are a couple of definitions that will be helpful for gaining the proper context of this discussion. The first is that narratives are, essentially, some story or account of something that has occurred. These can be true or fictitious, but the main point is that they convey information about events in such a way that allows for the one who takes in the information to track the progression and evolution of the events being described as accurately as possible. Now, this first definition is helpful, but it could also potentially cause some issues that we will address in the near future. The second definition will put some more meat on the bones of what we're trying to understand specifically tonight. Narratives may also be thought of as a way of presenting or understanding a situation or series of events that reflects and promotes a particular point of view or set of values. So here, we see that there is still a communication of information, only with the added nuance of specific points of view and value judgments. This is how the term gets used and is applied within the media and in most of all the political, cultural, socioeconomic, religious, and national identity discussions. With regard to psyops, they function at the level of narrative creation and direction, particularly in terms of influencing people's point of view or sets of values. This is their target. The core psychological drivers in any individual or group and the methods of manipulation available are as sophisticated as the human mind itself. The next thing that we need to establish for the discussion on psyops is that they serve purposes that are not unlike warfare. Where hot, kinetic wars are waged on battlefields in various disputed territories around the globe, the kinds of warfare that psyops engage in occur predominantly in the minds of everyone who is targeted by the tactics at play. One easy way to think of this is in terms of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. For decades, each country was always working to undermine the other in the minds and hearts of the people in order to establish each other's national cultural narrative as the most beneficial one. That the other was the enemy of goodness, and only our own system could bring the greatest level of prosperity to the people. In doing so, a constant and ever-evolving series of propaganda campaigns were used to paint both countries in negative lights to their respective populations, while simultaneously keeping the threat of utter annihilation through nuclear war as a very real and imminent possibility. The lines of good and evil were drawn, and the psychological stage was set to play out a decades-long exchange of attacks and subversion that really persists into today, despite any official declaration that the Cold War is over. There is far more nuance involved, especially in the history of all of those events, but it really does serve to begin thinking of psyops in terms of warfare that is carried out in the battlefield of the mind. There are both offensive and defensive psyops, and often both functions are present in the same operation. Thinking of psyops in terms of warfare is so appropriate that there are actually specialized groups within the United States military known as PSYOP. Each branch has its own group of soldiers who fall into this specialization. These groups first began to be formed during World War I and came into much more prominent use throughout World War II with the creation of the Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, which would eventually become the CIA. As the 20th century rolled on, the military expanded the PSYOP divisions, and now these groups operate anywhere in the world where the American military has a presence. They conduct influence and deception campaigns through all forms of media and are usually the first to enter into a potential area of conflict or a theater where the U.S. has a special national and economic interest. PSYOP sets the stage and manages perception at a global level, and nowhere is that effort more effectively carried out than right here at home. Much like the tools and tactics that we discussed with respect to propaganda, PSYOPs tend to focus on the kinds of narratives that are developed out of an individual or group's perceived sense of self or their identity. According to narrative identity theory, individuals form an identity by integrating their life experiences into an internalized, evolving story of the self that provides the individual with a sense of unity and purpose in life. This life narrative integrates one's reconstructed past, perceived present, and imagined future. This can be applied to groups and countries as well, and the details of these narratives are the specific areas that get targeted in narrative warfare. Often in today's world, we hear about information warfare, and the terms misinformation and disinformation get bandied about really to the point that they have pretty much lost their meaning. And that is exactly the point of narrative warfare. When it comes to narrative warfare, Dr. Ajit Maan, the founder and CEO of the US-based think tank Narrative Strategies, has said that the main difference between information warfare and narrative warfare is that narrative warfare is not really warfare over the information, but it's rather warfare or struggle or conflict over the meaning of the information. Now, this means that people will tend to cling to narratives which boost or promote their sense of self or their identity despite any facts or truth or evidence which reveal holes in how they are thinking or the beliefs that they may have. Narrative warfare has everything to do with targeting meaning that is filtered through that individual or group's sense of their own inner identity. Along with this, identities are complex and layered, which provides multiple levels for a PSYOP to be employed, altered, and then employed over and over again until the desired meaning is engendered within the target. Again from Dr. Ajit Maan, the more layers of identity you trigger in any PSYOP, the more influential you'll be. This is the strategy that we see at play when political agendas are seeking to shift the Overton window on any given policy. One of the main reasons I want to discuss PSYOPs is that we, as a people, have been under attack and engaged in this narrative warfare for decades now, and many are completely unaware that they are on the front lines of the battle. That's truly a dangerous spot to be in. I cannot overstate the level to which that we're being attacked, and I truly believe that if we're going to be able to defend ourselves from what is happening, that we need to be able to think like a military strategist and start understanding that there is a war being fought for meaning and truth at all times. I will end this video with a call to protect our individual identities from the kinds of narrative warfare that I've described by remaining strong and secure in the only real identity that matters, that being our imaging status as children of God. We're all made in His image, and we all share in that status equally. No amount of personal narrative or life experience can change that as the root of what makes us human. You can deny it, but that doesn't mean it's not true. With this as our foundation, we will be better equipped to withstand any attacks that seek to subvert the truth and divide us against each other along more superficial and unstable lines of distinction. We'll pick back up next week with a deeper dive into psyops and narrative warfare. And until then, stay safe, stay diligent, and stay vigilant, keeping your minds on guard.